Right, so here we go. So we're going to wrap up that phase of our futorializing, and we're going to have a couple of conversations between now and the end of the afternoon. So we're going to finish with a panel discussion with some very bright people from the likes of Google and Telefonica. We're going to hear more about cryptocurrencies with Mike Hearn, for instance, who you heard about this morning. So that's going to be the final discussion this afternoon. But we have another conversation that's going to lead into that, a bridge almost, if you like, between the Futorials that you've just been taking part in, and then the real crazy future guys gazing that we'll get into in our panel at the end. So, as ever, I've got to keep thanking all of you here for bearing with me and just being so good when I start talking and turning around and doing all this stuff. I know that you're not the kind of people who like being bossed around, so I'm trying to do it with a lightness of touch as best I can. But anyway, everyone's here facing forward. I know we have these pillars in the way, so if you can't see, just shift either way. So we have our tech foresighters, as you can see, back on the stage this morning. We heard from them, back on the stage this afternoon, I should say. We heard from them this morning, and they've been hanging out with you in the Futorials. What we want to do now is have a conversation led by you, and I'll jump in as little or as much as is needed, about the outcomes from today. An opportunity maybe to hear from you what you've come out, these crazy, wacky ideas you've had in your Futorial groups, and we can run them past the academics here and just keep asking that question. What does it mean for your business? So I think it would be great. Maybe one of the facilitators can do this, or anybody in the room. If you just want to start us off, maybe with an insight, something that, here's a starting point. Something must have surprised you at some point today. If it hasn't, there must be something wrong with you, or us. Either way. Does anybody just want to put their hand up and take a microphone and just start the bidding by telling us what has surprised you? We've got a gentleman here, so we're just going to bring a microphone over. So, tell us what has surprised you, this man just on the microphone here. Keep tapping, yeah. Yeah, you're on. So,
I'm John MacArthur from Shell. I was really impressed by Mirko's example of what looked like, what was it, herons or seagulls or something diving into the sea. And what got me interested about that is that I think the UAVs, the Predators, the Amazon, the Parrot things you can buy from already, these flying things are just mini helicopters. And that, I think, is very Me Too, and everyone's there already. So there's not a lot of innovation, invention happening in that space. What inspired me was the biomimicry and looking to nature and then thinking a different way that it does more than just be a small helicopter. It also does something else. And you might just transport around sensors, but that's still just doing one thing, flying and using the flying. But when you fly and you dive and you go underwater and you eat a fish, that starts to open up all sorts of different ways of thinking and possibilities. That maybe it flies, it lands, and it walks along a pipeline and looks for corrosion because sensors can't do it from the air. So I like this idea of multiple different modes, not just the different sizes of things and how they move around, but also the multitude of different things they could do. And it might not even be just the one thing that does more than one multiple mode. It might also be that it comes in and hovers there and then launches 1,000 small baby ones, which is another biomimicry idea. So that's what inspired me today.
I love the way you gave that concrete example there, oil exploration and going down to the pipeline. So what do you think of that then, Mirko, hearing that take, if you like, on your research and your biomimicry?
Well, thank you very much. I would very much like to echo that and say that this multifunctionality is really important in nature as well, but also in robotics. I think it can benefit a lot to different capabilities. So although if something that can fly can also swim or walk, it might not be the best flyer or the best swimmer or the best walker, but this combination of capabilities really opens an entire new world of what it can do. And so the challenge there is how to design it in a way that the locomotory modules would be used for different fluids, for different interfaces. So for example, if you look in nature, we are able to walk with our legs, or we are able to swim with our legs. So we use the same legs, Now we need to design the robots in such a way that they are minimal in weight and have the maximal of capabilities. And I think once we achieve that, then we have a lot of different applications.
And you think biomimicry is a good place to start in terms of coming up with these obviously elaborate and almost unlikely machines?
Yeah, definitely. I think we can benefit from how nature has done it, because nature has evolved so many things. And there's a convergent evolution that we see in animals that combine different ways how things are done. And these convergent evolution aspects are very important, because this seems to be something very good about it, that different animals share. And then if you copy this principle, I think we can improve robots.
Right. Okay. So any more for any more? Very interested to hear about what this might mean for your own business strategy. I don't know if anybody wants to make an outlandish claim for anything that might happen differently in their business, ideally around something that you heard today, or even just stuff that you're reading about and looking through, going to conferences and what have you. How your strategy is changing according to the likes of cryptocurrencies, embedded sensors in the body for health monitoring, artificially intelligent drones, those kinds of things. Who wants to just move this conversation on? Because I know somebody wants to. I know it's hot. Otherwise it's me doing all the talking and nobody wants that. Any more for any more? I think I saw a hand go up there. Yeah. In fact, yeah, good man, excellent. So there's a hand just going up there. So yeah, just again, just tell us who you are as well.
Yep, so it's Nick Colosimo from BAE Systems, based at Wharton. What struck me, I think, about the blockchain technology was its application, or the sheer number of applications that it potentially has. I guess fundamentally what it represents is a distributed, decentralized, secure processing and records keeping system. And when we think about the avionics on aircraft, for example, and the concerns that we have around cyber threats and also concerns around failures of components, there may be a blockchain-like approach for processing information on board in a distributed, decentralized way might offer us a much more resilient type of system in the future. And I just wondered what Will's thoughts were around that angle.
Yeah, so absolutely. So at the moment, everybody, of course, looks to the Bitcoin blockchain because it happens to be the blockchain that is supported by the largest amount of computing power and therefore has the highest integrity as a data structure. But certainly one of the sort of discussion points that came up in one of the groups that was really intriguing was, well, couldn't you actually develop your own internal blockchain for your own business purposes? The particular sort of use case that came up was to promote actually internal efficiencies and to enable multinational transactions and so on to happen more efficiently. But there's certainly no reason why it couldn't be used, for example, to assure the provenance and reliability of certain components in an avionics context. Just talking about this whole question of adaptation of form and one kind of technology being useful in another kind of context, that definitely applies in the blockchain space as much as it does in, for example, the drone space. Sure.
And do you see the barriers to entry into blockchain technology as being high or relatively low? And what do you kind of think of that?
Well, I think technically the barriers to entry are very low because there's lots of public available source code for all sorts of different kind of blockchains. I think it would be something that would be therefore quite straightforward and easy to apply. I think the difficulty, like all of these things, is coming up with that killer concept, right? That killer application that actually needs the features of the blockchain. Because quite a few applications, you could get a better response time, you could get a better user experience just by having a centralized private database, for example, that serves the needs of the company. You have to look very carefully at the use cases that actually demand something that is distributed, something that has to work in an environment in which there isn't necessarily the trust present. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, sorry.
So I don't work on blockchain, but one of the great things about blockchain is, from my perspective, is how secure it is. So coming back to your example in avionics, we know about possible attacks to avionics systems conducted through the Wi-Fi on board, and we know the stories on these concepts. So moving on from current technology to intrinsically more secure technology that makes these sort of things a lot harder to do will increase our safety on board as well.
It was also really good to hear Will talking about something that he had picked up, sitting at those tables and hearing about a proposed use case from the people you were with on your table and about their businesses. And well, hopefully it's been valuable to you all, because it's about all of you listening as well as lecturing and coming up with the insights about how your innovations are going to be valuable in industry. So Esther, from your own point of view, have you had any conversations so far today that, I wouldn't say have made you reevaluate what you do, but has it given you some other insights into, for instance, the kind of health monitoring applications you were talking about, how they might have other use cases?
Oh yeah. People come up with all kind of use cases. I mean, not just here, but wherever I go, obviously, I mean, when we started developing some of our technologies, we already had an idea of where we were going to without exploring all the potential applications. But what strikes me of today is that there were quite a few people coming with applications that were not health applications. So as I finish my talk, health is part of the use case scenario of these technologies, but there are many others, and many of those came up today.
Oh, good. And so what kind of applications outside health?
So monitoring the environment, for example, things that are happening in the environment, monitoring in remote locations, reducing size, reducing cost for this kind of monitoring that is nowadays done with very, very expensive instrumentation.
Yeah, so ways that businesses could save money, I suppose, and gain efficiencies.
And make it a reality, having more monitoring points.
Okay, yeah, lovely. Okay, any more for any more? Any observations? We've subtitled this part of the afternoon, Ask the Expert, so we've got 4 experts here. Anything you would like to ask them if you haven't had a chance to ask them already? Any hands going up, any takers? Yeah, we've got this lady just over here on the table, not far from the coffee bar. Oh.
On? Yes.
Here we go.
Oh gosh, yes, really is. Tanya Collingwood from Citi. Firstly, thank you to all the speakers so far. It's my first experience here. I think I'll be leaving smarter, although I feel a little humbled by my ignorance. So thank you for that, and some really great discussions. I think mine's more of an observation, if I may. Firstly, the relationship between all of your work that you're doing, I found quite fascinating, and that the kind of the worlds collide through everything that you've been discussing. But also one very strong theme that came through to me was regulation. It was something that you all mentioned, although obviously different regulators according to your different kind of areas of expertise. I guess I'm interested in maybe hearing from a few of you in terms of the future of regulation, kind of either as inhibitors or enablers of what you're all focused on.
Great question. Who wants to take that first then? That important idea of regulation. Be it drones or finance, whatever. Yes, fire away, Will.
Tackle it in the kind of cryptocurrency space. So obviously the issue of regulation is a tough one in this space. The government has a tremendous amount of uncertainty actually about what it's actually going to be dealing with and what kind of regulation will be necessary. And they don't necessarily want to regulate something out of existence. I think they would rather regulate it in a way that evolves the system that they would be happy with. I think if things in the Bitcoin space were just left to evolve in an unchecked kind of manner, then we could, for example, start to lose track of, for example, economic output. Right? How would that be measured? We would be uncertain about the effect of the regulations in the financial space. We have to decide, is Bitcoin actually a currency? Is it a voucher? Is it some other kind of asset? And I think, to the government's credit, they are really trying to get on top of this with regards to the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin space and so on, and they're trying to be proactive, but the nature of the beast, I think, is that it's going to take quite a few years before we get firm guidelines and proper regulation in this space.
How does it go with you, Mirko, and drones? What are the regulations, if any, about what you can send out there into for instance, the crowded skies over London?
Yes, I think regulation is very important and very much discussed in a drone space. At the moment you can fly it, you need line of sight, so not autonomous flight. and you cannot fly above people or close to people that you don't control yourself. So it's very much limited. But I think regulation is very much a social phenomenon. So it's very much fueled by the people that decide on regulations. And there it's about risk, but it's a lot about perceived risk. And we had this discussion on our table also that the perceived risk might be very different from the actual risk. And so I think there is something that will happen over the next years, which is an acceptance of this type of technologies and a certain trust on a human level to that drones are not evil, or that they can help, or that they're not dangerous or as dangerous as other things in our lives. And this will then lead to regulations which are much more realistic and not so much fueled by worst case scenarios or anxieties or different kind of extreme cases, I think.
Right, so when you talk about perceived risk, if anything, the perception is that drones and UAVs are riskier than they actually are. Is it usually that way around?
My impression is that, yes, that it's, I mean, if you look at cars or motorcycle accidents or bicycle or privacy of having a cell phone in your pocket all the time, I mean, you know, the drone technology contributes to that as well, but I think in the public debate, the risk perception is higher than the actual risk from my perception.
Okay. Esther, what about your, and I'll come to Alessio as well, but your own relationship with the regulatory environment? Because I was thinking, I suppose there could be two prongs here, partly safeguarding regulations if we're talking about the environmental use cases you were talking about, you know, monitoring air quality and seeing if that fits in with regulations. But then I suppose on the other side, what regulatory health bodies would have to say about some of the, you know, the monitoring technologies you were discussing. So I suppose two elements as far as I see it in what you're talking about.
Well, I'm a big advocate of reducing the regulatory constraints. I think that we are going crazy, to be honest. So as much as I understand that there are health procedures that have to be very, very regulated because they can potentially be dangerous, I think that in the case of wearables, we have to relax what is out there, because the whole point of these technologies is that they are very small, therefore they don't have many of the risks that big technologies had, but they have to comply with existing regulations. Then there is also another issue with in terms of regulatory approvals, which is that at the moment there is a massive bottleneck in terms of what we can do with the signals that we are acquiring with these technologies. So anytime we want to use any signal, we have to go through a new ethics approval process. So if we have run an ethical trial, a clinical trial in which we collect some signals, those signals, even if they are anonymized, they cannot be used for example, develop other algorithms. And that, I think, is a little bit the world going crazy, because if, in the same way that I said this is what we are going to be in 20 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 50 years' time, in our lifetime, we are never going to be able to track who a person is based on the electrical signal of their brain. What I mean is that there is no risk of leaking personal data from signals, some physiological signals that have already been anonymized. However, because regulatory bodies seem to think there might be a risk, we cannot use these signals freely. So I'm a big advocate for people donating these signals for free so they can be used for research.
Okay, yeah. So it's almost like the regulators need some educating there from what you're saying. Alessio, you wanted to come in as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so I wanted to agree with Mirko in the sense of regulations being a social concept. And of course, I mean, this is actually works in a kind of two-way street. One of the things that came out quite strongly in our table discussions, I think, was the belief that maybe society would be less prepared to accept accidents and dangers if these were caused by machines rather than being caused by human nature. So the example of all the deaths that happen in our roads, sadly, every year came out over and over and over. And together with that came the observation that perhaps people are more prepared, at least right now, to accept the central element of danger due to the interaction with the humans rather than the interaction with machines. And in terms of formal verification and the impact that can have to regulations, I think we're beginning to see quite a lot of the movement in that aspect, including in avionics. We've seen the US regulatory body introducing standards that amount to the fact that parts of the autopilots that actually drive our planes or fly our planes can actually be formally verified to be correct. So in that aspect, things are moving. I agree perhaps with the question that was posed, or the intention with the question, that things are moving quite slowly, but there is a lot of thinking that needs to be made on these issues. And frankly, I don't think it's just for the regulators to do the thinking. It's a topic that ought to be discussed by society as a whole. These are really thorny issues for all of us to ponder through and discuss.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask one of our facilitators to talk in a minute. So if you've been facilitating, as you're sitting there now, you can't relax quite yet. I want at least one of you to put your hand up and just feed back to us in a few words what your group did, what ideas were coming into that group, and what came out of it. So just whilst a few of you are formulating your answers before we jump forth, just whilst Alessio was talking, you mentioned autopilots in aircraft, and I just wonder if, kind of looking at aviation, is that an opportunity to think about how regulatory framework can shift? We know that aviation is highly regulated, and autopilot technology, I think, came in around the 1950s. And I wasn't around at the time, but I can only imagine there were some very difficult conversations about the extent to which automation could be acceptable in aviation. I just wonder, are we kind of going back through those same arguments now, but in terms of drones and driverless cars? So either Mirko or Alessio on that. Have we got anything to learn from the regulatory acceptance of autopilot over the last half a century?
Yeah, just one example on that someone suggested that instead of having a completely new regulatory framework for unmanned aerial vehicles, is to just let the autopilots take the same test as the pilots take. Okay. And so they did pass it, so they're not as bad. So they actually make less mistakes than the humans for the same regulatory framework. So now this is an alternative way of how to look at it. So if we just let them pass the driving test, the flight test. So maybe that's a way forward as well.
Right, fair enough. Okay, right, so hopefully one of our facilitators at least has had a few moments just to think about how they're going to sum up their Futorial and what came out of it for their group. So who wants to jump in? We must have at least one talkative facilitator. Ah, good, yes, so we've got Kit here, yeah. I don't know if your mic's on, but...
Hello, hi.
Here we go.
So our group was talking about sensing and the future of health, and regulation certainly came up as a kind of major cross-cutting theme. But I think another counterpart to that again was a sort of theme that was recurrent in our discussion, was the issue of data ownership. So who owns the data that all these devices are collecting and maybe leveraging either for new business models or indeed using for secondary research purposes? And I wonder whether there are parallels in the other sort of settings that might be worth discussing, for example, around drone swarms and things like that. So who owns the data in those kind of contexts? Ownership
of data. Because I guess if we don't nail this somehow, then we're going to lose a lot of business opportunities. So yeah, who wants to talk about, I know you touched on it a little bit, Esther, but you could either expand, or if one of the others wants to talk more about ownership of data. Yeah, okay.
So the interesting thing about a blockchain, of course, is that it's all public, and actually all the data can be seen and is essentially owned by everyone. But what it would then boil down to is clever ways to encrypt or otherwise obfuscate that information so that essentially it can be held by a person and yet be public knowledge at the same time. And that's kind of one of the whole paradoxes of the blockchain space that puzzles a lot of people. I think I've had a lot of questions on that today, but that's also one of the amazing things about the technology, is that you can prove something exists while not having to give away the ownership of the data at the same time.
Okay, excellent question, excellent point. What about threats then? In that last few minutes, I put you all together to think about the stepping stones and where next, and part of that might be thinking about any threats that you perceive to your enterprise. Can anybody speak to that? Any threats they're aware of? It'd be even better if you've come up with some amazing strategy for mitigating those threats, or maybe even the fact that you've acknowledged that they exist may be valuable at this stage, certainly in the short term. Can anybody talk about threats? Okay, so we have somebody over here who's been pointed at. Who is it? Put your hand up, who's going to talk? Ah, there we are, this gentleman just over here. We'll get a microphone to you. There you go. And yeah, if you can just tell us who you are as well. Thank you.
Hi, Mike Davis, Trafigura. For me, the threats really come from, you've already mentioned it, it's legislation about autonomous vehicles, AI, drones, but it's also public acceptance. As far as I can see, a lot of the countries we work in, we're looking at automation in mines, warehouses, our transport systems. We're putting out of work low-paid workers. It's going to happen here. If you think of it, autonomous vehicles. Uber, the trouble they're having in London, the trouble they're having in Paris. Just imagine when they come and introduce driverless taxis, how many taxi drivers in Europe are going to go out of a job? It's going to be public resistance, and it's a case of how we overcome that. I think in our case, what we're looking at is trying to, in the countries we're in, work with the individuals to basically work in tandem with autonomous robots, vehicles, and so on, to try and upskill them. But it's going to be a challenge because people will look at it as a, taking away their jobs.
Yeah, it's a big issue, isn't it? Kind of social acceptance, especially because one of my just for fun predictions earlier on is that there would be no such thing as unemployment, Freudian slip, no such thing as unemployment anymore. Partly because I went to a summit in Jakarta in Indonesia a couple of weeks ago, and one of the keynotes there was from the founder of the Grameen Bank, Muhammad Yunus. And he was predicting the end of unemployment. He was saying we shouldn't even think of ourselves as employees anymore. All of us can be entrepreneurial. So if you don't have a job, don't worry about getting one, just create a job for somebody else. And that was his thought. But what about, coming back to what this gentleman said here, the social acceptability of so many of these innovations. It's an age-old question, what it means for employment and people's rights and so on. And I remember that Futorial group over there had put unemployment, mass unemployment within 10 years as one of their predictions, completely counteracting my optimistic one from earlier on. I wonder who wants to speak to that. Social acceptability, whether in unemployment or indeed fear of drones or implantable devices, whatever it is. Alessio, again.
So, without wishing to be too provocative, I think all our jobs are on the line, or maybe on the line, including journalists, I'm afraid. We already have technology that does pretty good summaries out of long pieces of text. And actually this is used in the financial industry already to summarize statements from the industry to relate them to the stock market. We have technology that not only can do summaries, but can actually teach pieces of text to a high degree of understanding of complex text. We have technology for remote learning, so perhaps academics are also next on the line. I think the technological revolution that we're seeing may well affect all of us in this room. It is no longer the driver of the car, it is no longer the driver of the horse that we're thinking about. We are thinking about skills that we tend to normally to regard them as very, very high level, and we're beginning to see software that can actually do a pretty good job at this. So again, there is a lot of thinking that needs to take place, I think, in society, and who knows how it's going to end. If I had to put money on the issue of unemployment or employment, I would tend to favor favor in the sense of possibility, in terms of what I think might happen, a situation where a lot less people are actually required to produce the same goods and services that we need right now. And if that happens, we may actually need to think of a different system of distributing resources from the current one that we have, which is so closely related to the output we produce. Again, I think we live in very interesting times, and things will happen in this space.
Yeah, and it's very topical when you look at what's happening in Greece at the moment, and failure to collect tax revenue and indeed unemployment are the two big problems that have faced Greece. So I'm not necessarily saying this is a solution for Greece, but a really disruptive economic model that determines how we're going to distribute resources and capitalize on people's skills in the 21st century. Yeah, it's a discussion we need to have. That's fascinating. So what about, yes, I think a hand up over there. So we'll just get a microphone to you, sir. When the mic arrives, just tell us who you are, and let's hear your question.
Hello?
Yeah, I think we can hear.
Hello?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. So I have another question. If we think about a competitive market scenario where things are being done by robots in a decentralized way possibly, if we have competitive companies and markets that needs to basically make revenue, what will give the economic edge in terms of cheap production, cheap service, cheap labor, and who will actually benefit?
Okay. robotics question. Yeah, Mirko.
Well, maybe just some thoughts in this direction. I think we had the Industrial Revolution, industrialization of society, and so everyone, like a lot of people used to work in these chains to produce very manual labor, like very simple tasks. Now this was largely replaced now by robots or autonomous systems, automatic systems. And I think it was a benefit to society. I think as human beings, we shouldn't be doing things that can be easily replaced with an automatic machine that can do the same thing. So I think the whole entire movement of using robots for things that are dangerous, repetitive, or dirty, or not very pleasant, I think is a good thing. Not only for the ones that own the companies and make a lot of profit through all that, but also for the ones that are then not working on these chains in these conditions. So I think even though they might, in the short term, lose the job, and we talk about these non-skilled workers losing jobs, I think it is in the mid to long term a huge benefit where we can come back to our human values and redefine what we think about skills. So in our society at the moment, the academic skills are very highly valued, but there are many more, and humans and everyone has different types of skills. So I think low skill maybe doesn't exist as much as we think it does. So maybe different people have just different skills. And if we can harness that and benefit from that using robots in the chain, in the ecosystem, then I think we have a benefit.
And seeing as you mentioned benefits, and just to end this Ask the Expert session on a more positive note, we talked about a few threats. We also heard about a few opportunities. So our friend there at Shell, really excited about these adaptable robots that might be able to plunge into the seas and kind of multitask both as flying drones in the air, and then also to explore pipelines under the water. So, what a great example of, if these guys can crack the technology, that's going to help these people at Shell grow their business. Just any other thoughts, anything that's occurred to any of you today about a technology or a group of technology or ideas that you really think can improve the bottom line for you in the short to medium term? So I'd like to know what that innovation is and why. And there must be at least one. We've been wasting our time today if nobody in the room can think of one thing that they could say, yeah, that could add a bit of value in my business, even if it's not tomorrow, maybe on Tuesday. Any thoughts? Yes, say this gentleman again who spoke before, he's just got his hand up. And this will probably be the second to last question, so this is your last chance to get in on this particular Ask the Expert session. So I'm going to have one more stab at getting some questions from you, but in the meantime, take it away, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Nick Colosimo, BA Systems. I guess we've heard a lot today about autonomous systems, we've heard about the robots, we've heard about the machines. Perhaps one dimension that did come up quite a bit on our tables discussions was the notion of human augmentation, the human 2.0, if you will. Because we often make the comparison between machine versus man, when perhaps as we move further forward into the future, we should be making the comparison between machine and human 2.0, or some kind of augmented human. So from a business perspective, if humans are augmented, and we're augmented now, I wear a pair of spectacles, but we're also seeing augmented reality. We had Google Glass recently, recognized that was an experiment, but nonetheless these technologies are coming along, and if they can provide more useful information to the humans and make it much more accessible, then us humans can become much more effective within our businesses. I just wondered what your thoughts might be
great,
about that.
So outcomes for productivity, I guess. And
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. Esther. Yeah.
I go back to the end of my talk. The way I see it is, I totally agree that I personally think there is a threat with robots coming in and people losing their jobs and a few people making a huge profit out of it and overall society losing. However, there is another way of going about this, which is how about we make everything better for everyone? So that was my concept of let's use these technologies to sense happiness. So it's a win-win situation. So I think that's, and things like, as you say, augmentation can be a way of, you are 8 hours working in front of your computer, and those 8 hours, by the end of it, might actually be quite painful, mostly for people who are doing very repetitive tasks. How about we make those 8 hours less painful? That could be based on augmentation, based on using these technologies. So that's where I think we should go as a society.
Augmentation of happiness, absolutely. Time for one quick one, if we fancy. Yeah, gentleman just over here with his hand up. So, yeah, just on this kind of middle table here. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Amin, or I'm geophysicist at BP. Well, I had two comments. Well, the first thing is that at BP we use a lot of these technologies already. You know, we use those drones to inspect our pipelines, and we send those robots at 3,000 meters below the sea surface to put those sensors and all these things. And Esther's talk was quite interesting for me because I thought actually we're putting more sensors on our platforms and on other things, but not enough on people. And actually we send our people on very hazardous environments. And I can see Esther's health sensors being the next step for us is really to have people monitored all the time when they go to this kind of environment. The other thing is a comment, but probably for Mirko, is when we talked about skills, I think losing skills is quite important, and for me I think it's a bit worrying, because by relying so much on those robots and all those softwares, I mean, they work really nicely when they work. When they don't, it's a big issue. And when they don't, you can't rely on them to fix themselves. And if you don't have the skills, if you have lost the skills of that tasks that the robot is doing, it's very, very difficult, especially in these days. Maybe 100 years ago, if a robot missed a piece of a disk or whatever, you could go back again and do it. But these days, these tasks are so complex. Diving into it will take you years, especially if you haven't done these things. So I think there is a risk there by losing these skills when things go wrong and when humans need to intervene to do something to correct for them.
Okay, and I know it's more of a comment than a question, and only because we got to 3:30, we're going to leave that thought hanging. It's a great thought to end on, especially because we are going to have a panel about, are we getting overexcited about technology? And so one reality check may well be, well, are we getting so excited maybe we are losing some core skills and reducing happiness, possibly, for people and families. Really interesting thought to end on. So this is the last time formally you're going to see them today, but some of them will be hanging around, apart from one of them who's going off to be live on the radio for a bit. But they're all generally around, I think. But first of all, can we just say a very, very big thank you to Alessio, to Esther, to Mirko, and to Will